Evening, everyone. I hope that you've had a great start to the week. Tonight, we continue in the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to be in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 to 21. This is going to be the first of a two-part mini focus that we're just going to be doing over tonight and tomorrow night, looking at the passage found between verse 19 and verse 24 in Matthew chapter 6 about storing up treasures in heaven. And the reason why we split it into two parts is tonight I just want to ask the simple question: what are the treasures in heaven? What are our treasures in heaven? What's the reward that we are told to store up in heaven that moth and rust cannot take away from us? And so let's read together Matthew chapter 6 verse 19. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so immediately we see the call is in verse 21, and this is a central theme here. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And this reiterates the theme about the heart is central for Jesus. The focus of the heart. What is the heart loving? What is the motive of the heart? But why has Jesus now come and started speaking about treasures here? Throughout chapter 6 so far, we've seen the three outward acts of righteousness in which you and I could fall into an empty external righteousness and ignore inner righteousness. And three examples that Jesus uses are giving to the needy, prayer, and fasting. And in verse 16 to verse 18, where Jesus has spoken about fasting that we covered on Friday evening, Jesus says to them, "Truly I say to you, they have received their reward in full already." And so Jesus is saying, and he's juxtaposing these two different kinds of rewards. He's saying that there is an earthly reward, and then there is a heavenly reward. And so the question that we are asking tonight is, what is this heavenly reward that we are to be seeking? In order for us to understand what these treasures are, we need to look at what they are not first. And so Jesus has said here, the treasures in heaven are not something that can be taken away, and they are not something that can be destroyed. And so he compares this to treasures on earth that moth and rust can destroy, and thieves can break in and take away. And so immediately we see this, that the treasures of heaven are eternal and glorious. They are eternal and glorious. This is the first motivation of the Christian heart, is that we don't have to fear that the rewards that we would be striving for as Christians are things that can be taken away from us, but they are held in the hand of God in the same way that the Lord is holding us, and the Lord is holding our salvation, and we cannot be robbed of that. Added to this, we also see that the treasure is one where your heart is. And so, what is the treasure? Is the treasure the same thing that we would view as an earthly treasure? What do I mean when I say this? Some people have viewed the treasures in heaven as in the same light as physical treasures on the earth. And so we would think of mansions, we would think of cars, we would think of riches, and that there would be wealthy people in heaven and that there would be poor people in heaven. And this is not the picture that the Bible would paint of our reward in heaven. It's not that you would be rewarded with physical things that you can stand before all the other people in heaven and show them just what a great Christian you were on earth. The reward in heaven is the glory of God himself. Or in Matthew 25 verse 23, Jesus would say in the parable that the Lord would look on those who have run the race, and he would say to them, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And that would be the goal of the Christian life, in that we would not be serving and striving to honor the Lord and glorify the Lord with our living and our obedience, so that we could gain eternal riches being in an earthly sense, But the glory is that we would stand before the Lord, we would see him in all his glory, and we would be filled with that joy everlasting, and we would hear the Master say to us, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That is the treasure that we are to store up in heaven. But what does he mean when he says store up in heaven? Does this mean that there are varying degrees of reward? Matthew chapter 16 verse 27 says this: "For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father. Then he will repay each person according to what he has done." Revelation 22 verse 12 follows a similar theme, where it says, "Behold, I am coming soon, bringing my recompense with me, to repay each one for what he has done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end." And so from these scriptures and others, we could see and that there is, can we call it, varying degrees of reward for the saints in heaven. Now, that would raise questions with us, and let's deal with one or two of those. One of the questions that it must raise within us is going, well, if there are varying degrees of reward, isn't that fertile ground for jealousy? And my response to that in a simple form would be no, because in heaven there is no sin. And that jealousy is of a sinful form, and therefore there wouldn't be that heart of jealousy to look at what someone else would have and feel jealousy for the glory that they are seeing before them. But I think Jonathan Edwards, the Puritan theologian, helps us understand it when he illustrates it in this way. If I may modernize some of the measurements that he would use, he would speak of a container. And imagine there was a 2-liter container and a 5-liter container. And you fill the 2-liter container up to its absolute maximum capacity. And then you fill the 5-liter container up to its maximum capacity. And then ask the question, well, which one of these containers is more full? The answer is that they are both equally full, but their capacity is different. And so the illustration that he has used and that Christians have held to throughout the centuries as it helps us understand the reward of the glory in heaven and the varying degrees that the scriptures would teach is exactly that we would all be filled to the maximum capacity that we can be filled in heaven of God's glory. And in that, there would be no place for jealousy. He carries on in his teachings, and he would say this: in fact, it would be the one who is filled with a lesser capacity would look at the one who is filled with a higher capacity and be so filled with joy for his brother or sister that the joy that they are experiencing in the Lord, there would be no room for jealousy. And the one who would have the greater capacity would look down at the one who does not have the as greater capacity, and would not look down in the negative sense, but would look at them and is not filled with a sense of pride and arrogance, but is filled with such joy at the capacity that the other is experiencing the glory of the Lord. And so for us, there is a degree of mystery around the theology of reward and treasure in heaven. But we know ultimately that all crowns would be thrown down before the feet of Jesus, as it says in Revelation chapter 4, verse 10 to 11. We know that our reward is not physical. Our reward is Jesus. Our reward is to see the glory of God and hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And so my encouragement for you, as we would work through this over the next day or two, is this a motivation of your heart? Does the desire to see God in all his glory fill you with a motivation for greater obedience? Does it fill you with a motivation to love the Lord well over all other things? For as we will look at tomorrow, that is exactly what gaining treasures in heaven is putting the Lord first. May you be blessed. May your heart be stirred by this. May your mind be stirred by this. And may we grow in just our desire to see God in all his glory. Have a blessed evening.